Hi guys, this is Max here, back again with hopefully another great political video, and today we're going to make a very nice election prediction for 2024. Today we're going to go with the best Republican candidate for office, which in my eyes is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, against the worst likely candidate for the Democratic Party, which is Kamala Harris. Now, obviously, there are better and worse candidates for either party, but none that have real good high national profile and none that could mount a successful campaign to win. Anyway, I suggest we get straight to it. Now, Kamala Harris is really in Dick Cheney slash George W. Bush level in terms of her approval. It dwindles at around 28%. Heck, that woman can't even crack 30% in a environment in which there are still more people identifying as Democrats than as Republicans. But just like with every election, it will most likely be the independents who ultimately decide which way it goes. Now, Ron DeSantis is definitely a guy who has lots of guys that love him. Of course, his follower base is not as passionate as Donald Trump, and it might also very well be possible that he does not end up being the nominee. It might be that Donald Trump runs again. I'll also make a prediction, a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But anyway, as of right now, I think it's a good time to make a prediction, shall we? Now, I believe Kamala Harris would still win California safe, which is her home state, in Hawaii. Ron DeSantis would win Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, except for the 2nd district, it would all be safe. I also believe that Kansas would be more than a 15-point margin again. He'd definitely improve in the Kansas City area. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri. I don't think Illinois will be safe Democrat. Tennessee, safe Republican. Alabama, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia. I honestly think he'd win Iowa safe too. And yeah, I believe those are all the states that are going to be safe Republican for sure. Of course, Kamala Harris will win New York, Maryland, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Maine's 1st congressional district. I think these would be all the safe states for the Democrat Party, and I think that'd also be all the safe states for the Republican Party. Now let's get to the states that are still here. I believe that actually Ron DeSantis would win Ohio by a safe margin. It really, not as much as Iowa, but it has also trended very, very Republican, and it would honestly not surprise me if he was going to crack 15% in the state. Democrats are just losing their grip on Ohio, and it's especially the eastern areas in Ohio, right here in the Ohio River Valley. They're not maxed out yet. So Republicans can still improve there, while Democrats are really, really falling behind, and they're not even gaining in the suburbs in Ohio. All right, now let's get to Washington and Oregon. I believe Washington would be likely, and I think Oregon would go by a lean margin, maybe, just because the progressive base isn't necessarily fired up to turn out for Kamala Harris, and at the same time, Republicans would improve. I don't think that either of those two states is going to flip, but I do think that they'd be closer than they usually are. Alaska, I believe, would be at the breach of being safe, but I would put it as a likely margin, simply because Alaska, it's kind of a weird state, politically speaking. There probably will be a very high third-party vote share for some candidate. It might also be safe, because if the Green Party gets a lot of votes there, then Kamala Harris would, then the Democrat vote would be split. But simply because Alaska is so difficult as a state to predict, it always leans Republican, but nobody ever knows for sure. It's always good for a surprise. I'll put it as a likely state for now, but that can change. Now, I believe Arizona will be lean again, and Texas will be likely Republican, even though it will be almost safe, simply because Ron DeSantis would do a lot better in the suburbs than Donald Trump did. And at the same time, he'd not regress. He'd even improve in the rural areas. Glenn Youngkin improved in rural areas, even though he's not really a Trumpy Republican. And I also think that DeSantis would win Nevada. I would like to say by a lean margin too, but I'm going to put it as tilt because it has been so Democrat over the past few years. I believe he'd win Nevada because he'd improve in the suburbs. He'd improve with working Hispanics. Yeah, actually, he'd win it by a lean margin, to be honest. And Kamala Harris is just not popular. So you have to consider that. I believe Colorado would be very close for Kamala Harris, but she'd still win it. I mean, the suburbs are growing, but it's still if you run a very unpopular Democrat against a very decently popular Republican that has a good record who's been attacked multiple times by Democrats, all of these attacks backfired miserably. It'll just be very difficult for Kamala Harris to fare well anywhere in the country, and Ron DeSantis would easily win that election. In terms of winning, I believe New Mexico would be the slimmest of margins. It'd be a few percentage points, like it was in 2004. I'm not sure whom to call it for, so I'll leave it out for now, but I believe that DeSantis would win Wisconsin by a likely margin and Nebraska's 2nd District lean. Wisconsin, just as Iowa, has still lots of rural areas in the Driftless area between Madison and Minneapolis that are not maxed out yet for the Republicans and that could very well trend to the right again. I believe that Ron DeSantis would carry Minnesota, though barely, but also here, the Republicans are not maxed out in the rural areas, and they're trending more and more to the right. I believe he'd win Michigan by either a lean or a tilt margin. I believe it'd be 1.2% in the end, so that's a lean margin. And yeah, I believe Michigan would go lean, so would Pennsylvania. And you see, Ron DeSantis is almost there. And what this election will ultimately come down to is probably the usual swing states, just like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Oregon, which usually isn't a swing state, would be competitive, though, I believe. Now, Illinois will be likely Democrat. It won't go as far as being lean, but Republicans, especially Ron DeSantis, he'd do very well in the rural areas, and he'd improve in the suburbs. I believe it'd be like an 11 to 12 point win for Harris. And now let's move on to the Northeast. I do believe that Ron DeSantis would very, very slightly carry New Hampshire. It's very, very difficult to say who wins New Hampshire because it is a very, very strange state, politically speaking. I believe it would actually be a lean margin, though. I believe he'd win New Hampshire. It usually has... It's slightly more Democrat than it is Republican, but it can support Republicans every now and then. And especially wars are a big issue up there, so it'll depend on how the candidates' foreign policy stances are. Ron DeSantis will win Maine 2nd District, likely, I believe, and the Maine as a whole. I believe he'd win Maine 2nd safe. And I believe Kamala Harris... No, actually, I believe he'd very, very slightly carry Maine at large. Simply because I don't think this will happen very often, but Maine's a very independent-leaning state, and in a national environment where the independents break heavily for the Republicans, it would make sense for them to win Maine. But Maine at large is a complete toss-up. Now, we got a few likely states for the Dems. I believe that Connecticut and New Jersey would be likely. I don't think that the Republicans would win, but it largely surprised me if Kamala Harris was to do very well in those two states. Because if you look at New Jersey, it is usually a blue state, but it is not a crazy blue state like New York, for example, or Maryland. It's always like a 15-point Democrat state, and every now and then it can elect a Republican governor. I actually believe it will be lean. No, I'll leave it for likely for now, because going lean, that'd be kind of a bold move, and we'd have to see some clearer polling on that, but I do believe Delaware would actually be... Delaware would actually be a lean state, because there Joe Biden really has a low approval in his home state. Out of all places, he's not faring very good. In Virginia, I believe, would be a lean margin for Harris, very, very, very narrowly. It'd be 2 or 3%. But I believe Ron DeSantis would win South Carolina, and he'd win his home state of Florida by a likely margin, and that's going to put him over the finish line. Now, of course, Harris will win Washington, D.C. That's never going to go red. But other than that, I seriously think that that's it. Yeah. My final prediction, okay, we got to do New Mexico. This is difficult, but I think if the Hispanic trends continue, Kamala Harris is not really... Oil is also a big thing in New Mexico, and Kamala Harris is very, very anti-oil industry. So I believe Ron DeSantis will win New Mexico. And yeah, so my final prediction are 334 electoral votes to 204. That is yeah, that is what I expect as of right now. The best Republican against the worst Democrat. That is how the election is going to go. I know it might seem weird to have states like Oregon and Delaware be just lean, but that's just what happens when the national environment is heavily biased into one direction. I believe that Ron DeSantis is actually a very decent governor, and he might also make a good president. I definitely like him more than Kamala Harris, but of course there are other Republicans and other Democrats who might be just as good as him or even better, but I generally like Ron DeSantis. I think he's a good governor, and I think he's very patriotic American. Now, anyway, this is it with my video as of right now. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you use the website yourself, yaps.com, yapms.com. You can make your own predictions. If you like this video, likes, comments, and subscriptions are greatly appreciated, and I hope you'll have a nice day. Max out.